My name's Luke, if I haven't met you before. If you're new, just to update you where we are at in church life. We just finished a series last week on Galatians, which was really good. And we are looking ahead to getting into the book of Jonah. But we've got a 1 week stopover. And and the topic of wisdom and the fear of the Lord. Now, it took me about 2 seconds into looking into this topic to realize it probably wasn't the wisest idea, because it turns out these 3 books are some of the hardest to understand in the Bible. So I just want to temper expectations if people think they're going to have them down in this 20 minutes. And so with that comes a disclaimer. These books, there is very little consensus around certain parts of them. Pretty much for everything that someone says about them, you can hunt down someone who is saying the opposite. And yet in that, I think we learn something about wisdom. And that is that it is hard to come by. It's not waiting to be purchased off a shelf in the supermarket for $10.99. It's not something that we can just assume we will stumble on as we journey through life. No, true wisdom is not actually all that common. And I also would not want to suggest that 28-year-old me has it figured out either. So my hope today is not that we will take a last step into thinking about wisdom, but merely that we will take a first step into thinking about wisdom, especially these 3 books, Job, Ecclesiastes, and Proverbs. And I want to provide a framework we can use to come to them, to wrestle with them, and to learn from them. Because despite their difficult and challenging nature, they are still gifts from our Heavenly Father for our benefit and for our good. So a brief structure for what we'll do today. Wisdom books and what is in them. Then we'll move to the fear of the Lord and how that connects all these books. And finally, we will think how it impacts us. And I've titled that Faith in the handout. We have my wife, it's whether carrot should go in the bolognese. Really riveting stuff in our household. I am firmly in the negative. I would not like carrot. My wife is in the positive, and so we have carrot in the bolognese. Nothing wrong with that. I think there are just some things in life that don't go together. I am not a pineapple on pizza sort of guy. Not a carrot on bolognese sort of guy. I also really don't think you should put milk in tea. Yeah, another one. From first glance, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job do not seem like they go together. They're as distinct as water and oil. You see, Proverbs is like a really good car salesman. He is confident. He doesn't get bogged down in the details. He's an eternal optimist. He knows what will happen. There will be no surprises. That is Proverbs. Ecclesiastes, on the other hand, he is like the worst car salesman you've ever seen. The guy is a nervous wreck. He thinks your car is going to break down tomorrow, and if it doesn't break down tomorrow, it's going to break down eventually. And you know what? He's skeptical of cars in general because he can't understand what is in them. And his conclusion is usually, it's probably better just to walk. And then we get Job, and to be honest, Job can't even find a car dealership. That guy is lost. And so we have a temptation. It's to pit these 3 books against one another. Now, in our rationalistic and scientific age, we tend to champion Proverbs, which says, if I do A, then B will happen. We say things like, eat your vegetables and you'll grow up strong. Work hard and you'll get a good job. Exercise well and you'll be healthy. We desire control. We desire to understand. We desire assurance of results. And that is exactly what Proverbs gives us. If I can go back to this illustration on the screen, We all want to be buying our cars from the Proverbs dealership. And we look at the Ecclesiastes dealership and we sort of scoff. Who would want to go there? Ecclesiastes is the wisdom that says we cannot know anything and we should just try have an enjoyable time before it all goes away anyway. Who wants to buy their car from that guy? And so we all get our brand new Proverbs cars and we drive them around town and it's all going great. But then sure enough, smoke starts coming from the engine and you look at the dashboard and all the lights are on. And you realize in that moment that the issue with Proverbs is despite the fact he talks a big game, he just doesn't truly represent the world that we live in. And so maybe you do glance across at the Ecclesiastes dealership and mutter, maybe it is better to just walk. Ecclesiastes, two vastly different opinions on wisdom. And yet I want to suggest that these two wisdoms that seem to go in the opposite directions are both correct, and that we actually need both of these wisdoms. We actually see this in the story of Job. If you don't know Job, here is a little bit about him. His life is like a case study of wisdom. He, for 36 chapters, tries to piece together the mechanisms of a complex world. He asks, if the wisdom of Proverbs is correct, if doing good leads to good things, then why is this happening to me? Why am I suffering? I haven't done anything wrong. And he says, and if it's the wisdom of Ecclesiastes, well then what can I possibly do about what is happening to me? And Job wrestles with the complex world he is experiencing, and he comes to this conclusion in chapter 8. This is his conclusion of wisdom. From where then does wisdom come? And where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. Abaddon and Death say, we have heard a rumor of it with our ears. When he gave to the wind its weight and apportioned the waters by measure, when he made a decree for the rain and a way for the lightning of the thunder, then he saw it and declared it. He established it and searched it out. And he said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to turn away from evil is understanding. The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. That's where Job ends up. And I think at first glance, this isn't going to take us too much by surprise. But I think the thing about the fear of the Lord, at least that I've found, is it's kind of like a really wet bar of soap. The more you try and grab hold of it, the more likely it is to spring out your hands and for you to lose it again. If the fear of the Lord is wisdom, then we must ask, just what exactly is the fear of the Lord? And this is where I want to turn for the next few minutes. In all of the wisdom of the Bible, fear is a consistent theme. We saw that in our readings. However, the object of that fear is not consistent. That actually changes throughout the books. In Proverbs, we read the fear of the Lord. Here, it's the word for the covenantal name of God, the God that they can know, Yahweh, which is revealed in Exodus. It's a word that means intimacy and knowledge. However, if we flip over to Ecclesiastes, we read, now has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. Now, this word God here is the generic word for God. There is no sense of knowledge or intimacy or relationship. And these two names represent two different ways of finding wisdom in relationship to God. I'm sure many of you recognize this photo of President Kennedy and his son under the Oval Desk. The picture has become famous because it captures the personal relationship of the president and his child. And for a moment, President Kennedy is no longer seen as a president, but as a father. How different the relationship must be between President Kennedy and his son, and President Kennedy and one of the many American citizens. Proverbs invites us to fear Yahweh. It invites us to live in light of the fact that we can know who God is, we can know what he is like, and we can know the world he has made. It invites us to know God as a son knows his father, and to trust God as a son trusts his father. The wisdom of Proverbs, it flows out of this knowledge. It says, if the Lord is just, and we know he is, then we know that the world that he made is also just. If the Lord is unchanging, and we know he is, then we know that the world he made is ordered. If the Lord is good, and we know he is, then we know that his world is good. And so in Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, because if you do not know the Lord, well, then you don't know how to live in his world. And the wisdom of Proverbs says, do not be deceived. You cannot forget God and hold on to the wisdom that he owns. For God cannot be mocked. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Now, just as President Kennedy's son can look at the president and see his father, he must still look at President Kennedy and see the president of the United States. So we also can look at God and we can say that is our Father. We also must look at God and recognize that that is still the God who has created the whole universe, who is beyond the universe. It is still God. And so this is where Ecclesiastes comes in. It says, this is the end of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. And this generic term reflects the wisdom of Ecclesiastes. It assumes that God is not knowable and he is not relational. That there's no personal name by which we can call upon him, and there's no way he can be known. And so it's understandable, and there's probably something too, saying that this, in a sense, is not godly wisdom. It's understandable, many people say that. But I want to say we shouldn't come to that conclusion too quickly. We read as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. See, what Ecclesiastes is saying is that even in his most intimate relationship with his people, God retains the right to be incomprehensible. The wisdom of Ecclesiastes is a warning. It's a warning against thinking we can know God in such a way that we could systemize him, pack him down into a box, and know what to expect when we bring him out. That we can walk out of our days and know what we should expect for tomorrow or a week's time or for the rest of our lives. And so wisdom in Ecclesiastes is not the fear of the God that we can know, but it is the fear of the God we can never know. Now, I've been holding back a little bit on the definition of fear in this context, partly because it's really quite tricky to see just what fear is. But here is a definition. I understand fear in wisdom literature to be referring to our foundational truth that shapes us. The thing that we bend all other truths and reality around. What we assume to be true in order to understand the rest of the world. And this illustration to help us understand this, I've got a friend who is just petrified of spiders, cannot even see them. So if she's in her car and she sees a spider in the car, she pulls over, she starts walking. If she's in her apartment and she sees a spider in her apartment, she gets in her car and she drives to her parents' house, doesn't go back for a while. If she sees a spider in her apartment and then goes to her car and sees one there, I'll let you know if that happens. But she'd be in real trouble. But the point is, in a small way, her fear of spiders shapes the way she lives her life. To fear God is to shape our lives around the reality of who He is, both in His ability to be known, as Proverbs suggest, but also in His ability to not be known, as seen in Ecclesiastes. And I want to suggest that this is the reason that wisdom is so hard to find and so difficult to understand. Because we constantly are being called to wrestle, adjust, and think once more, just who is this God who we are worshipping? And the moment we stop wrestling, we fooled ourselves into thinking we can know God, even though He cannot be fully known. Or that we cannot know anything about God, and so we should not even try. As soon as we stop wrestling, that is when wisdom slips out of our fingers. For in that moment, our fear is no longer of the true God, but the God we have simplified for our own benefit. Now, this the riches of Job and the fear of the Lord, but let's do what we can in the time we have. So Job, the story is, he is a righteous man. He is good. According to Proverbs and its wisdom, Job has good things coming his way. And yet God makes an agreement at the start of the book with an adversary that Job should suffer to prove his righteousness. And so Job suffers and he cannot make sense of it. However, early in the book, some friends show up and they tell Job they know what's going on. And they employ the full weight of proverbial wisdom. They say, we know God, He's just. Therefore, if you are suffering, you must have done something wrong. They are Proverbs people. And yet Job knows he has not done anything wrong. And so Job experiences the fullness of ecclesiastical wisdom. We read, he says, if only I knew where to find God, I would go to His court. But Job cannot find God. And he cannot find any rhyme or reason in what has happened to him. And to show up. We want God to impart some knowledge of Himself that will show it does actually make sense. To redeem the wisdom of Proverbs. And finally we get our moment. God shows up. We're ready for the full explanation, and yet that is not what God does. God, in full ecclesiastical wisdom, points out all the things Job could never know. Do you know how the stars were spread out across the heavens? God says. He points out all things Job couldn't know, but he never gives him his answer on why he is suffering. And so we think at that point, well, maybe ecclesiastical wisdom wins the day. But then at the end of the book, Job gets everything back because he never speaks falsely of God. And that is proverbial wisdom. This is the story of Job. It is the tension of the ecclesiastical wisdom and the proverbial wisdom lived out in the real life of a man who experienced both in their fullness and needed to understand them both. And so naturally we ask, what does Job mean in chapter 28 when he says, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom? Is he talking about proverbial wisdom? Or is he talking about ecclesiastical wisdom? Now, it turns out that this word Lord that is used in Job, it's actually not the word that is used in Proverbs, and it's not used in Ecclesiastes either. It's a new word. And I think in this way, Job does not side with Ecclesiastes, nor does he side with Proverbs. Proverbs looks at wisdom from the perspective of the God we can know. Ecclesiastes looks at wisdom from the perspective of the God we can never know. And Job implores us, to be wise, you must hold multiple perspectives, even though they are in tension. He teaches that the fear of the Lord in Proverbs and the fear of God in Ecclesiastes are useless to us if we do not take them and apply them to our relationship with God as we walk along with him in the realness of our life. The wisdom of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, they are like two offerings that we are to take to God in our hands. And we are to see how he uses them. And so we come to God to know what wisdom is. That is the fear of the Lord in Job. If you've ever spent much time in Ecclesiastes or Proverbs, I wonder if you've noticed that they talk a lot about God, but God never actually shows up. No, God shows up in the book of Job. And I think that is beautiful for us as we think about wisdom. For Job's conclusion is not that wisdom is found in what we can know or what we can never know, but wisdom is found in what God reveals to us when he shows up. This is what Job says. Surely I spoke things I do not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. This is what it means to fear the Lord in Job. So to finish, I just want to talk about what this fear of the Lord will look like in our lives. Wisdom's meant to be practical, so let's go there. And I want to say it practically warns us against our tendency to simplify. And I think we can simplify in two ways. We can simplify in content, and we can simplify in scope. So regarding content, it's natural for us to want to be able to grasp things, understand things. It's how we operate in the world. And yet, if we get the fear of the Lord, we would prefer to wrestle with complexity than fall into simplicity, because that is a reflection of who our God is. I think a good case study for this sort of simplifying can be wealth and the prosperity gospel. Now, there is no question at all that the prosperity gospel is a perversion of God's goodness, of who he is and his gospel. And yet, the Bible does make a connection between righteousness and prosperity. I'm going to put a few examples of the scene in Proverbs. The blessing of the Lord brings wealth without painful toil. Trouble pursues the sinner, but the righteous are rewarded with good things and more. Now, the prosperity gospel terribly turns these proverbs into promises and turns God into a glorified vending machine. And in this way, the prosperity gospel completely misses wisdom, as it doesn't wrestle with God, it just assumes him. And we have this response of, we need to reject that. It's not right, and that is correct. But in our desire to reject the prosperity gospel, there is a real danger of rejecting too much. And in doing so, rejecting something true about God as well. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we have a place for these verses and verses like them in our understanding of God? For God made the world and he ordered it, and it seems this is the way he has ordered it. We must wrestle with these complexities rather than fall into simplicity. So practical application number 1, let us not simplify content to make ourselves comfortable, but let us wrestle and respect God and the complexities of the world he's made. Second, just how far God's wisdom extends into our world and lives. I wonder if God offers any wisdom for those who are considering doing property development. It turns out you could go to Proverbs 23:10 or 24:27. He talks about it there. Does God offer any wisdom to the presidents and prime ministers of the world? Plenty of wisdom in Proverbs 10:14 and 29:4. But the point is this: God's wisdom is soaked into the very fabric of the world that we live in. For he made every person, everything, every idea, every facet of this world. To him, when he looks at us, we are like little children playing with a puzzle that he created, and his wisdom is the instructions on how to complete it. Proverbs 14:4 says, "Where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but from the strength of an ox come abundant harvests." This is a proverb just about mundane, daily, domestic life. And this is what God's wisdom is. It can extend from the most mundane things to the very height and peaks of this world. In fact, there is nothing in this world that isn't reliant on God's wisdom. So whatever we do, we never separate it from how God tells us it is to be done. Whether it's finances, family, marriage, work, pastoral support, sleep, leadership. It is all a part of his world, and therefore it all operates according to his wisdom. And so practical application 2, the scope of God's wisdom is all-encompassing. There is no way we can escape it in this life. All that we do in the fear of the Lord, in relationship with him. It is the only path through this world. And so to finish, I thought we would just hear some of that wisdom from some verses in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. For he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to the end."